Hey, Kristi, it's Tracy and Kristi from the Bellator Society. And you are used to Fran and I on Wednesdays having a little conversation and sometimes interviewing somebody. But today we're doing things a little differently. Today we've got one of our contributors, Kristi Bentley from Nashville, Tennessee, and she is going to interview me today and just kind of talk about the Bellator story and my background and kind of a get to know you type conversation. And then next week, it's Fran's turn in the hot seat. So tune in this week and next week. Hey, Kristi.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you
Uh,
for being here.
I'm happy to interview both of you, as I'm a fan. I'm a huge fan of both of you. I just had a conversation not too long ago about how much how beautiful your friendship together is to watch on this, live stream on the podcast, to listen to you together. And so thanks for letting me in and
Yeah, thank you.
being a part of this. So yeah, I actually kind of put my foot in my mouth a little because I was hanging out with Fran and I said, it would be really cool. I said, I know about you guys, but I don't know your story. And you should get someone on there to interview you. You should have your husband interview you. And I would love to know more about, Francel's acting and more about your adoption journey, Tracy. And she goes, "Oh, great, you can do it. You're in." I'm like,
So
so
we said earlier, it kind of reminds me of church ministry. If you have a really good idea, you have to be careful not to like share it or suggest it or complain about it, because then you're
yeah.
like the head of that committee or whatever the case may be. Like you're going to be collecting the diapers or you're going to be doing the flowers at church or whatever. So yeah, when you've got a good idea, it's like, do I share this or not?
Yeah. Well, we love hearing about how you guys took your walks, and I want to ask questions about those walks
All
and
right.
how you got Bellator Society started. But first, I'm going to ask you about you.
Okay.
I heard Franchelle say earlier, yeah, some people ask us, like, is Bellator Society like really Catholic, or and you guys are like, yes, yes,
Yeah.
and we are too, and so how you got there, and kind of what inspired you to get there, and we just want to. So I'm just going to
Okay.
start with, just tell me about where were you born, where were you raised, were you born and raised Catholic, and tell me about your family.
Okay. So my dad is a Lithuanian immigrant. And so he immigrated to the United States by way of Germany when he was about 5 years old. And they lived in Chicago and then made their way down to Hot Springs, Arkansas. And so his story is that they were Catholic in Lithuania during, Nazis trying to take out all Catholics and all educated people. And so my grandfather was the equivalent of like a Supreme Court justice there. And so they were on the list, they were on a train to Siberia. The train broke down. They kind of had a harrowing escape, and a priest friend from Lithuania was kind of ahead of them on their journey. And so he really helped them get to Chicago and then to Arkansas. And believe it or not, there was a large Lithuanian Catholic community in Hot Springs, Arkansas, which sounds, I know that's like bizarre, right? But anyway, so they had their own mass times in Lithuanian. And so that's where dad kind of grew up. And then my mom was born and raised in Little Rock. So she's as American as apple pie, blonde hair. And so here they were very different, Eastern European, very Southern. But they met in college and actually at a Catholic kind of campus ministry type event. And my
Mhm.
mom had gone to the convent. She was starting religious life for a couple of years and came, she said she was too vain. She said it was time to cut her hair. She was like, maybe I'm not doing this for the right reason. But she still loved the church, just decided that that was not, the vocation for her. So she
Mhm.
left. And so they met in college and got married. And my dad was in medical school and he became an army surgeon, and
Okay.
he was in the army. So, and that was around Vietnam. So he was a flight surgeon in the army and ended up doing his residency in dermatology. So we moved all over. So they met in Arkansas, but my sister was born in, Honolulu. I was born in San Antonio.
Okay.
She got the exotic, fun place to go visit, and I got the Alamo. But anyways, we ended up, I think they always knew they wanted to be back in Arkansas. So we ended up back in South Arkansas, where he opened up a practice and was there for almost 40 years in private practice. And so we grew up in a real small, tight knit community, 2 hours from both sets of grandparents, lots of aunts and uncles. They were both one of 7. So we had lots of, family support. And so that was kind of my early story. So both my parents are Catholic, and both my grandparents were Catholic. So I grew up in a very traditional Catholic faithful home where, we went to mass every Sunday. My mom was the youth director. We prayed at home. We prayed the rosary. My grandmothers always had rosary beads, on them. And so looking back, I'm so fortunate because I realized not only were my parents pouring into me, but my grandparents were too. Yeah. So that's kind of my early, and I have one sister.
Okay. And she's older or younger than you?
She's older.
Okay.
She's older. My mom said she wanted 6 boys. 2 girls. So there's that.
That's how God works, right?
Isn't that funny?
He knows what we need. Yeah, I got 3 boys first. So that was a shock to me. But so since you were in this tradition of this Lithuanian culture, is there any differences in like Catholic Lithuanian upbringing that would be different from
No, there's not. I mean, the Universal Church is pretty amazing. Yeah. Obviously the language would be different, but no, they were Roman Catholic. Now there's differences, and I wrote a blog about it. Like on Christmas Eve, we don't eat meat. So there's little things like that.
Little things, yeah.
We have a dinner called kuchis, and it's 12 cold, meatless dishes on Christmas Eve, and each dish represents one of the apostles. And you're very hungry on Christmas Day. You're very thankful for the birth of Jesus, but it was a little sacrifice. And I think in hindsight, years later, I've learned some of my cousins would go to McDonald's afterwards. We did not. My mom was like a better Lithuanian than some of my Lithuanian family members, but she was like, no, this is how we do it. So that's things like that. Like my grandmother's passed away. She was 93 or 94. And she passed away in I think 2007. And that tradition's kind of died, which it's sad, when the older family members passed away, like we did kuchis every single year. And so now I do it with my family. But some of those things that were so rich in my life are just no longer. Nature.
Yeah. Well, that sounds really cool. I'm thinking I've never had a meatless Christmas Eve. So we're a sausage and peppers family all around on Christmas Eve. So
I said I did not realize that people ate like steak and chili until I was in college. Probably I'm like, what? A feast on Christmas Eve?
So tell me about where you went to college and what you studied and why you studied it. What kind of your early years?
I graduated from El Dorado High School in 1996, and I went to the University of Arkansas. And El Dorado is on the Arkansas-Louisiana border, and the University of Arkansas is in Fayetteville, and it's at kind of where Walmart headquarters is, sort of like on the Missouri border. And so it was about a 6-hour, I stayed in state, but I really felt like I kind of went off because there were a lot of colleges closer to my hometown, like Louisiana Tech was 45 minutes away. South Arkansas University was 30 minutes away. There's UCA, University of Central Arkansas, where my parents went. So I got a little bit of that freedom where I felt like I was really going away. And I pledged a sorority. I was a Chi Omega in Fayetteville.
Okay.
And got a degree in advertising, which I've never used because that was a smart idea. I think at the time my dad was a doctor, and I have a lot of my aunts and uncles and cousins are doctors and stuff. And I always would say, hey, I think I want to do this. And my mom would go, this is my one regret with my mother. There's a lot of science in that. And I'm like, oh, I don't like science. So now I'm going back to school because I want to be a nurse, which I wanted to be all those years ago. So I'm like taking anatomy now as a 40-something-year-old woman.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm kind of reverting to like my original plan.
Okay. And you're back into the science.
I'm back into the science. I think in hindsight, I think my mom wanted to support me. And probably when I was in high school, I was like, yeah, I don't like that. And so every time I chose a major, she'd go, oh, you're not going to like that. Instead of just being like, suck it up. You can do it, whatever. But I got a degree in advertising and public relations, and actually went straight to work on President Bush's, then Governor Bush's presidential campaign.
Okay.
And so I got a job right out of college on the campaign in Arkansas, because if you remember at the time, President Clinton was in office. So Arkansas was obviously went for Clinton previously. And so it was a battleground state. And it was determined that the governor had to win Arkansas to win the election. And so we had President Bush, Governor Bush was in town all the time, which was really exciting. We had Clinton, Lieberman, Gore, Cheney. So I remember like the day before the election, or the 1 or 2 days before the election, we had every single top tier, person in the state. So it was kind of a hotbed. And I got, I guess, a taste for politics and government and stuff right as a, 22-year-old, which was really exciting. So yeah.
Okay. That sounds really exciting, actually. I have one friend who has worked on a campaign before, and it just always seems like there's so much action happening, so much going on, and so much to do.
It is. It's so exciting. It's one of those things and you realize now by campaigns, there's really senior people and then there's young people. And you realize because you have to have so much energy and so much, you don't sleep for months.
Yeah.
And I realize now why a 22-year-old and a, early 30s, it's perfect, but it's hard to kind of maintain that energy level when you get a little older, because it's go, go, go.
Yeah.
But it's thrilling.
Yeah. That sounds cool. So did you ever make it to DC doing anything with that?
Yeah.
Didn't I hear something about you going to DC? So tell me about going to DC.
So I did go, and after the campaign, I actually stayed in Arkansas and worked on another campaign. And then after the midterm elections, went to DC and got a job in the White House. And I was in counsel's office briefly, and then I moved down to the political affairs office, which was one of, Karl Rove was the senior advisor, and we called it Rove World, but he had a handful of offices that were under his purview. And it was like political affairs, public liaison, intergovernmental affairs, and strategic initiatives. And so those were kind of the Rove offices. And I was the assistant to the director of political affairs. So I was there through the re-election. And we planned like all the president's domestic travel, kind of anything that was politically, had any sort of political leanings. And we planned any events that he had with like the Republican National Committee, the Senatorial Committee, the Governors Association, that sort of thing. So it was super fun, which is where I met my husband.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's where you met your husband, in DC.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then let's talk about him. So tell me how you met your husband.
Well, he worked at the RNC, which is the Republican National Committee, and I was in political affairs. And so, there's a lot of overlap, but he happened to work with my roommate and my college best friend, one of my college, best friends. And we were actually roommates in college, and then we were roommates in DC. And she came home and was like, there's this new guy from Arizona. I'm going to pick him up. We're going to a concert, and it was a free concert, like on Independence Avenue. And she said, I'm just going to pick him up, whatever. I was like, okay, fine. Didn't really think anything about it. And the rest is kind of history. I mean, we didn't really hit it off the first day, but and then we fell in love.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your husband, was he already Catholic as well?
Okay, so I have told him that he'll be mad at me for saying this because he says it's not true, but he said I'm Catholic as a pickup line. He was Catholic. He was born, baptized Catholic as an infant. His great uncle was a priest who we got to be really close with when we were in Denver because we lived there for 5 years, and he was
Okay.
a retired priest in the Archdiocese of Denver. And he married us. He celebrated our wedding, and just a precious, precious man. He's since passed away, but he had fallen away from the church. His dad had passed away, and his dad was Catholic, his mom wasn't. So he had some of his sacraments, but not all of them. Mm-hmm. And which makes marriage prep super fun when you can't really remember your sacraments. But it was really awesome to, the minute I said I was Catholic, and he goes, I'm Catholic too. And I'm like, oh. And then, you're like, when's the last time you went to mass? But from that moment on, he got back in the church and really had kind of a revert as an adult. And, when we went through our marriage prep, we got married in Arkansas, but we did our marriage prep at our, hometown parish in Virginia. And our priest was Father Paul Scalia, Justice Scalia's son.
Wow.
And so again, we couldn't figure out, like, had he been confirmed? We're not sure. He was like, I knew I took classes, but
yeah,
I think that was just probably his first reconciliation or something else. We knew he'd gotten to that point.
Yeah.
We had the certificates through a little bit of searching. And so Father Scalia actually got special permission to confirm him. We just had a little private mass, and he was confirmed during our marriage prep.
Wow.
Which was awesome. Yeah, it was kind of a cool memory.
Yeah. Well, my husband and I work in marriage prep, so we see that a lot. Marriage prep really makes you look at things and decide which way you're going to go.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. So did you draw him back in? Do you feel like you drew him back in?
I mean, I don't want to say that now, but I think he knew there was not going to be a relationship or a marriage without that. And he wasn't resistant at all. I mean, I think, like a lot of men who maybe don't have Catholic parents or parents who aren't super, devout Christians, it's easy to fall away, and it's easy to fall into kind of a secular world. And he went through some tough times when his dad passed away, and then his stepdad got brain cancer and passed away right before we met. So he had, some struggles, some legitimate struggles. And he never turned his back, but when you don't have necessarily family members that are always going to mass together, I think sometimes when you're growing up, and especially in college, it's sort of that herd mentality. Like, we go because we always go. And then, as you become a little bit more mature in your faith, you really own it. And I think he had a little bit of that missing, but then he really owned it once he owned it. So that's his story. That's our story.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. So, you were talking about your parents, your grandparents, everyone being, Catholic. Tell me more about what formed you in your faith. Like, what was it that kind of kept you in the faith? What was it like where you felt like you learned the most? You kind of, where'd you get lit on fire to kind of lead you to this place of Bellator Society?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know, like I said, my grandparents were very devout Catholics. And so both my parents were. And I think having that kind of that generational strength and that generational faith, it was really just not a question. And I remember talking to my mom about, like, what if I meet somebody that's not Catholic and they want me to go to their church? And my mom said, well, you would need to go to their church if you want them to come to your church. If you want them to come and participate in the mass, you got to give them a little bit of, leeway if they're devout Baptist or whatever the case may be. It never really got to that point, but she always kind of, she gave us enough leeway to know that we weren't going to hell if we stepped foot in another church. But yet our home was the Catholic church.
Yeah.
We always, so there was never that tension
Yeah.
of, wanting to rebel or anything like that.
Yeah.
And then when I went to college, so I have a lot of cousins, a lot of cousins. And my mom actually had some infertility issues. So she was married for she and my dad were married for 8 years before she had my sister. And then I think by the grace of God, she had me. And it was determined that she should not have any more children because she was really sick during those 2 pregnancies. But I had a lot of cousins and I had a lot of aunts and uncles. And one of my uncles is a deacon. And so there was just a lot of family influence.
Yeah.
And when I would make mistakes or do something stupid, as a teenager or as a college kid, I'd have an uncle say, again, my mom had a lot of brothers, so it was a lot of uncles, I kind of get a talking to. So I knew that there was always, it wasn't just mom and dad. It was, it was a family affair.
Yeah.
So I think that probably really influenced me. And then just as I said earlier, as the older I got, the more mature in my faith I became. And really the more I studied it, the more I had to think about, what would I do if I, fell in love with someone that wasn't Catholic? And so I really had to look into that and figure out how important my faith is to me. And of course, that just probably is what made me even more just fall in love with the church and realize that there was no other, church for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you have any like spiritual reading books or any saints or any particular authors that have kind of helped to form your heart or kind of led you closer to Jesus? I know that's something that I have a lot of friends say, oh, that book changed my life, or oh, that
Yeah.
saint, they found me. And I think it's through their intercession that I just like got catapulted into where I am. Or do you have anything like that?
I will say I have a lot of stories on saints, but I will say that I fell in love with Scott Hahn's writings when I was in college or right out of college. And it's funny. Well, I'll back up. So again, when I was kind of doing my spiritual just journey, my spiritual kind of research, and again, I knew I was Catholic. I was that kid that went to mass during college by myself. Like, that was important to me. And it was also maybe a little guilt. I knew that was just my obligation and I was going to do it because that's how I was raised. And then, but out of college, it was like, okay, well, why am I doing this? And I read I actually didn't read it. I've read it, but I watched the videos of Rome Sweet Home where Scott Hahn and his wife, Kimberly, go through their conversion stories. And it was like, obviously that makes sense. Obviously that's what we believe. But I had never really been able to put it in my own words until and it's funny because I'm not sure when they filmed it, but they had hairstyles from the 80s or 90s or whatever it was. And they actually filmed their original videos. But they put it in such plain speak that I just really fell in love with their works. And I remember the first time I got to meet Scott Hahn in DC at a book signing, I was like giddy with one girl that was Catholic that I worked with, and we walked in the snow to have him sign books. So I love his work. I love his writing. I think the saints have pursued me and I have pursued them over time, depending on the season I'm in. So my middle name's Anne. So my patron saint is Saint Anne. When I got confirmed, that just, made sense, which I tried that with one of my daughters and she was like, no, I don't want her. I want him. And I'm like, I was such an easy kid. I was like, sure, Mom, you're right. Saint Anne would be a great patron saint. So she's always kind of been my grandmama, my tender, soft, which anyways, she's always been the saint that's sort of like my umbrella, big hug. But then there's been times like when my mom was really sick, I fell in love with St. Peregrine and I really turned to him and prayed to him a lot. And we went to Lourdes when she was ill. And so I fell in love with St. Bernadette. So there's just, it just depends on what I'm going through.
Yeah.
if I'm going through hard times, like St. Jude and St. Anthony are my go-to. So I think it's just like with your friendships with anybody.
Yeah.
If you need style advice, I call Sarah Beth. If I need, spiritual advice, I have a litany of people. But it's who I turn to in kind of the
Yeah.
situation I'm in.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I think that's so cool how different saints find us, or, like you're saying, according to the journey that you're on, how they come out of the woodwork, and they really just help. So
Yeah. It's now, and now I'm like, hey, Facebook. I think we're back. Excuse the technical difficulties, technical delays. We blame everything on Satan that's technical when we have technical hiccups. And this is no different. But we're back, and we're really, I think, back to tell you we're taking this conversation somewhere else. If you ever watched, I think, Friends and Full House, and maybe I'm dating myself, there's always good cliffhangers, and it's always a to be continued. But really what our idea was that we would start this conversation on the live, and that we'd get to the really good stuff for the podcast. And that, of course, is always aired on Fridays. And so thankfully, Kristi's going to join Fran and I on the podcast next, and you'll hear the rest of this conversation here in just a little bit. Does that sound good?
yes, yes, that sounds great. I can't wait to ask you about your walks with Fran. I can't
Yes.
wait to ask you about your journey to adoption. And also, I had a question about some little intel I got from some friends or your husband about you.
I'm kind of really curious myself.
Yeah. So looking forward to talking to you more. Thanks for having me.
All right, I'll see you on the podcast.
All right. See you
All
later.
right. Bye, y'all.
Bye.